Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to All Things SOPPA, your Tuesday afternoon entertainment at 2 o'clock every Tuesday. I extended the Zoom invitation out until the end of May. So if you want to join us any Tuesday over the next 2 months, you're more than welcome. As always, these will be recorded and will be available on the YouTube playlist. So please do that or revisit those as you have questions. And I've been trying to, as I've answered questions in the conversations, I've been able to link those to people as well when I'm responding to them to help with that as well. So let me make sure everybody can see the screen here. Again, this is a weekly conversation. The slideshow that's listed there, the bit.ly for the LTC _ all things SOPPA, is a ongoing slideshow. So all the stuff that we've talked about over the last 5 weeks is available in that. At the end of the slideshow in the archives, you can look at all the tips and suggestions and the how-tos and those types of things and see what was covered during the YouTube video if you want to go back and look at that. Also, the YouTube videos, I've tried to chapter them so you can go to specific places within the videos as well. So check those out. And as always, if you need to contact me, my contact information is available on that link as well. So as always, let's just kind of get started here. Go to slido.com and the code is Z972 for you to share how you're feeling about SOPPA. So overwhelmed, and that's to be expected. So exhausted. So I think that's a good representation of kind of what we're all kind of feeling. And so hopefully these all things SOPPA weekly things can help with that and give you time to kind of take a breath and look at what's going on and just be aware of things that are happening. So the first question is, what is SOPPA? For those of you that are just kind of coming on board with all this stuff, if you check out this data privacy link and look at the documentation there, that's about halfway down that page, is dealing with the Student Online Personal Protection Act. There's a one-pager there for people to look at and to pass out. There's also a 1-minute video that is kind of goes through those steps that are required. We are building a frequent asked questions, and that's something that we need to really build on as we go. If you watch the webinar from Robin Schwartz, they've made a big emphasis on the recommended reasonable security practices, both from a operator standpoint and as a school. So that's an important piece of information to look at as well, and not much that we talk about in these discussions, but it is something that we need to definitely be aware of and talk about. The Illinois Student Privacy Alliance, that's what's going to help you navigate all this with the management of agreements. And then Robin Schwartz put out a in brief about a month ago, or a little bit over a month ago, that kind of summarized what SOPPA is and a way for you to kind of look at what it is. So our weekly agenda here just initially is just to give you some background on what's going on with the database and what's happening, and then give you some tips and suggestions and additional resources that you can take a look at, try to answer your questions, and then after the questions, just provide a little how-to. So it's kind of a weekly thing that if you come to these meetings, you can get some how-to stuff. And if you want to come about halfway through the session, you can do that. If you don't want to hear all the other stuff, you can tune in about 2:30 and you can get some how-to stuff. But that'll also be recorded and be available in the YouTube playlist. So just looking, and the main reason I show the statistics is for you to see that things are happening, that people are using the database, that agreements are being made, that that were, if you look at the originating DPAs, that means that there's approximately 130 different operators that have agreements on the database that people can sign up with using the piggybacking agreement or the piggybacking process. And that 64 of those originating agreements, or 64 school districts are responsible for those 130 agreements that people can sign on to. And then if you look at the signed DPAs, you can see that other districts are piggybacking on those 130 agreements. So that number should go up. The one that I think is interesting is the unique resource requests. And that's something that you can utilize to keep track of your agreements or your resources and where you are in the process of keeping track of those. And that number should not really grow all that much, because hopefully as they work through the workflow process, those requests become agreements, and so then they would drop off that resource request process. So, but just within the last, so a good majority, I wouldn't say a good majority, but there are several, probably about 15 or 20 districts that requested an account just within the last couple hours because of that Robin Schwartz webinar. That each week, and you'll see the archive listing of all these is available. Sorry. But these are the new ones that have been added to the originating agreements. And so these are available for school districts to piggyback on as well. So those are available. And then you can also see those in the database as well. All right, so moving on into kind of the nuts and bolts of the conversation here. Publicly thank the Illinois Council of School Attorneys, SOPPA working group for their work on the agreement and the collaboration with us to help this get done. The original Exhibit G was put in place about in October, and that was originally done by Robin Schwartz. And then as more districts began to use the agreement, more legal teams were involved. And so we worked with the Illinois Association of School Boards and this Illinois Council of School Attorneys, and they developed a working group that spent hours on looking through the Exhibit G to and the NDPA to make a revision to this document. So this there it is available on the website. It should be linked there, but you should see some notifiers when you or some landmarks when you're on the document itself. It should have the Illinois NDPA version 1.0A, which is on the front page, and then each page on the footer, you should see that it was updated on the 15th of March in 2021, and that it's a new Illinois Exhibit G. So that's really the only thing that's changed. I did make some adjustments to the fillable portions of the agreement as well, where the Exhibit H wasn't shrinking based on the amount of data that was in it. So that should be auto formatting that as well, just like the Exhibit A does. That text box should shrink, and most of the fillable cells should shrink as far as the database goes. Other things to consider with this new agreement is that the new version does not void or otherwise impact any existing agreements that have already been signed and uploaded to the database. So anything that you've done up to this point is still good, still usable. You're still able to sign Exhibit Es, but I would also make sure that you're legal. If you're signing an Exhibit E that's based on the 1.0 version, not the 1.A version, 1.0A version, that you just make sure that your legal team is okay with both agreements. Both agreements should be SOPA compliant, so there's not any reason that it shouldn't be. And if the vendor signed it and you signed in the originating district to sign those originally, then you should be able to subscribe to that based on that process. So there's going to be lots of questions, lots of workflow with this that we're going to have to figure out. The other thing, the other big news, and I kind of alluded to this last week, that the auto exhibit e-creator is available. It should be on your under your district agreements menu. And I'm going to do a little bit of how-to on this, but ultimately it should list every agreement that is subscribable. And there's also a way for you to search the listing so you can see if there is an exhibit E for your particular agreements. And also, this is an easier way. There's a way to export it to Excel for you to see exactly what's available for you. But that auto exhibit E creator will be very beneficial as we're moving forward, which ultimately is just a one click, and then it's going to fill in the signatures for you as and then it will continue to email that document to the vendor. Also, this is going to be something, just a regular occurring slide, is just continue to ask for enhancements to the database. So if there's things that you're encountering that aren't working, or feel like there'd be a better way, or you need another field, or you need something that to be helpful, make sure that you're sharing those things with the SDPC so that they can be vetted and implemented on a recurring basis. For those of you that were here last week, again, State Board has adopted the Illinois Association of School Boards press policies regarding the SOPPA implementation. So 7.345 is there for you to utilize, and there's also some administrative procedures there as well. If you are not a member of or not subscribing to press, you can access that stuff by emailing, and this link here is actually a link to a person at IASB that you can request those documents from. But if you're already a subscribing district, you don't have to email them. You can just access that through the portal and work with your administrator or whoever has access to the press policies for that. Just as a resource, I'll just leave this in here and leave it in the front of the slide deck, just for people that want to look at the presentation or watch the on-demand recording of Brian Bates talking about what's necessary for teachers, and the slide deck's available here for you to grab out of that as well to help in those conversations with teachers. This is really the landing page for you to go to get the latest information and to know when the upcoming events are and different things. So please utilize the services ISPA website within the LTC website to get that information. I posted directly on here the link to the NDPA document, so that should be available. The flow charts that we talked about in previous webinars and in the Robin Schwartz webinar are there, and then also the YouTube list is there as well. So you don't have to, if this is the only page you go to, this would be a great resource for you to go to. Tomorrow and Thursday, K-12 Tech Forum is doing a couple different SOPPA updates. So if you haven't had enough SOPPA this week, you can get some more. And so that would be an opportunity for you to register for those. Those are virtual as well, for you to get more information about what's going on and get to hear more questions and answers to about SOPPA. Future webinars for that. So that's the main thing that I'm aware of. I know I'm doing a presentation for ROE3 in April as well. So if you're in that area, I'm going to do that for particular ROE tech people. But other things that are going on with technology, definitely check out some of these, our Be Connected series, and then also our for your teachers and your administrators. There's other events within the LTC as well. What should we do if a company reaches out to us and says that they are SOPA compliant in their terms of service and they do not want to receive more Exhibit Es? So I had a conversation with a vendor this morning, and that conversation was around what the Illinois NDPA is, what the benefits are to them, what the benefits are to the school districts, and they were very welcoming to that, um, and appreciative of the information. And so I think that something will come out of that. I I see two things in this question. One thing is, if a company reaches out to us and says that they are SOPA compliant in their terms of service, they may be compliant in terms of service, but there is a requirement to have a written agreement between the district and the vendor. So that is something that needs to be uh, available to your public, to your parents, to your school district. And so I don't believe the terms of service is going to be that unless you're in, and I ultimately the answer is if you take it to your attorney and they say it's okay, then you would link to their terms of service and you would be okay. The problem with that is that every district is going to have to go to their lawyer and say, is the terms of service okay? And they're going to have to look through that entire document and say, yes, this is, no, this isn't. So then we're going to have to negotiate and have um, conversations. So the Illinois NDPA, if that was in place, and even if there was an Exhibit H that um, that the vendor needed to have in there, at least in that case, each attorney would only have to look at the Exhibit H at that point. They wouldn't have to go back and revisit everything that's in the Illinois NDPA. They could just look at the Exhibit H, and if there's only 2 or 3 things in there, that's going to be a lot less billable hours for you as a school district versus having them look through the entire terms of service. And then as far as the second part of that question, they do not want to receive more Exhibit Es. I mean, we could go in all kinds of different directions with that. So I'm just going to leave that there. That's kind of I have a snarky answer for that, but I'm not going to say it. But I think that that's kind of doing business, and that's something that's necessary, that we have to have an agreement. And if the Exhibit E has a signed agreement with each school district, then they know that they have a signed agreement and we know that they have a signed agreement. So, and the vendor that I talked to today was very appreciative of the information and very appreciative of the process and the work that's gone into the Illinois NDPA, and saw the benefit for them, and also saw the benefit for their 300 plus school districts in the state of Illinois that would need to have something in place. So the law has an area that mentions apps containing only name and email do not require an agreement. Can you touch on this? I guess I would need to know specifically what that is. Covered information is any student information, personally identifiable information. Ultimately, if you are going to not have an agreement with a particular vendor, then you would want to make sure that your attorney, and I might come back to that and I may overuse going back to your attorney, but I feel like that's not for me to judge. It's not necessarily for you to judge. It's for the attorney that's going to defend you if there's a certain situation that you're called on that needs to be addressed. So I don't think there's a clear-cut answer there, but definitely you need to, and that's something that we can build. And I made a note of this, and I've heard this through conversations before with other groups, is that we need to have a list of maybe like a searchable database of some kind that would show us that certain people have said we don't have to have agreements with that, and maybe what their rationale was. And so that we could have that kind of checks and balances there. for people, but ultimately what one school decides may not be based on their advice from their attorney, may not be the same advice that another attorney would give. So make sure that you're double checking with all of that when you're making those decisions. Is there a way to add a resource so it appears on custom resource page without adding an agreement? I.e., I want to show an app is available, but no PI is used. Yes, there is. And to be specific, I will make some, I'll make a video to show how to do that. I don't want to fumble my way through that right now, but there should be a way to list vendors or operators or resources that you want to be listed that people can use, but they're not using PII, or that you don't want them to use as well. So you can keep track of that list as well. And I'm going to come back to the discussion on the updates in Exhibit G. So I will address that. Just want to make sure I leave time to get some of these other questions, because I think I could go long on that. Looking at our custom resource listing, there is no agreement status listed. What should we put as the status when uploading? Prepared Exhibit E is what I used. In that case, please reach out to me specifically, schedule a time on my calendar so I can help troubleshoot what exactly that is. It should ultimately be an active status to show up on the database, but it could be something else that's keeping that from happening. So definitely reach out to me individually with that particular question, and I can look at that. Did you interpret the legal definition of operator discussed today as not including Facebook due to the K-12 language, focus language? Yes and no. As far, I actually texted Tim in the background and said that's a very gray area. I wish it was black and white, that here's your K-12 operators and here's not your K-12 operators, and all that stuff, because ultimately, and I think Facebook is not really the one that I'm concerned about. I don't feel like they don't have a K-12 focus, and two, we're not really putting personally identifiable information in the sense of like a user logins, or that the students are using Facebook or anything like that. There's that whole discussion of outside of SOPPA with FERPA and sharing of school student information, student names and pictures and all those types of things. That's a totally separate conversation. But when it comes to, and even like people were using the example of Adobe and Google, and I think the presenters even mentioned Google Calendar. So Google Calendar is actually a G Suite for Education core service. And so I feel like if you have, in using Google is probably not the best one, because we have to work through getting an agreement with them and all that kind of stuff. But just for example purposes, this is what I'm going to go with. Google Calendar is part of the core services of G Suite for Education. G Suite for Education is a K-12 focused product. And so all those services would be listed in the Exhibit A for services that are offered for that particular operator. The problem we're going to get into is when we start looking at those non-core applications, and some of those may be like YouTube and some other stuff that are going to be a little bit more hard to pin down and make either white or black as far as that distinguishing, building that line in between. And even Adobe, like I feel like the question, and this is really just me thinking from this is not something that you can probably defend or something that a lawyer would care what Chris Worley says, but I feel like if there's student data involved, we need to be worried about it. We need to be concerned about if we're giving that to an application, whether it's K-12 focused or not K-12 focused, then we need to be concerned about it, and we need to do best effort to try to get some kind of agreement with them, or some kind of knowledge of what's going on and what's being used. And otherwise, if we don't, I just feel like we're setting ourselves up for, uh, and this isn't a because it's the law, it's because it's the right thing to do, and it's because it's something that parents are concerned about, kids are concerned about, and ultimately we as school people and employees and everything should be. And we can definitely have conversation around that. um and so, and we could probably like get stuck in trying to figure out, is a particular application going to be this way, and we can only do what we can do as far as getting agreements with them. But I think that's something, as a, if we're approaching it from a state standpoint, um, it's something that we can collaborate on and have like information. And it's not like 853 school districts have to all go to Adobe and try to get an agreement and feel like they're being let down because they're not. Um, if one goes and they have some dialogue, and we can have that dialogue as a state and understand what it is that we're trying to do, and then maybe go back to them at some point, or other methods of doing that. um, I think it's it's something we need to approach, um, and try not to get overwhelmed by the idea of those particular vendors that we may have difficulty with, but just approach them in a way that, um, we're trying to do what's best for kids. And I know that sounds kind of hokey, but that's really what we're trying to do. So don't get too caught up on whether or not Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or any of these, I mean, or Adobe or Google for that matter, um, whether or not they meet the legal definition. Um, I know it's overwhelming, and um, so if you want to have a conversation around that, we can definitely do that. Oops, I think I clicked on one that I shouldn't have. I don't know where it went. If there's if that question didn't get answered, I think I double clicked instead of just clicked. Or maybe I unclicked it real fast. Do you interpret so that's the one we just did. All right. Could you review again the difference between the with exhibit and with no exhibit version? Um, Really, there's no reason to have that without an exhibit. Ultimately, that would be if a vendor did not want to have an agreement originating, like you could as a district just say, I'm going to enter into an agreement with Seesaw, and I don't care if anybody else jumps on that exhibit. The exhibit is Exhibit E, and that is the subscribing process. So if that's, don't get caught up in that. I would just download the one with the Exhibit E, um, and that's the one that I would use moving forward. And if you do have specific questions, again, reach out to me and I can help with that. Can you do a demo again where how to create an Exhibit E if there's already an originating agreement? I will do that. And that process will be simplified as we move forward. Do we need to create all new originating agreements if we're using the new to contract? All right, so yes, moving forward, it would be best. Like I know that some people are in the process of agreements with the original agreement and all that kind of stuff. It would be, in all ideal possible ways, anything moving forward from this point on, that we use 1.0A as the agreement, as the originating agreement. If you do have agreements that you have started already, please, before you upload those originating agreements, check with me. And I know there may be, and I know I'm kind of opening up a lot of work for myself and for you. But that's something we're gonna have to work through because we do have a new originating agreement. I think it would be best if we move forward with the new Illinois NDPA 1.0A as that originating agreement. So if you do have 1.0 agreements out there that are waiting to be signed and all that stuff, please check with me as far as the originating agreement, and we'll see what we can do to help with that process. What about Moodle servers that a teacher is using for classes that is hosted outside the district? Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it would really come down to who owns that Moodle server, who is like that's part of one of those security best practices is to know where your data is at, know what software you're using, um, know who's using it, who has logins, what that data is. So if you could figure out who the host is of that Moodle server, I think it's probably beneficial to have that agreement. Again, that would be something that your attorney would advise you on, one way or the other. But if it's like a hosted service, like a Moodle hosted service, then that may be who you need to reach out to work with that. Or the other option may be to bring it in house and figure out how to manage it that way. So um, so there are lots of questions about that. Like, I mean, I don't want to speak in very specific terms because it is unique situation. There's probably lots of um, answers to a question like that, lots of what ifs and it depends type of thing. So, but I do understand the question, and I think that you do need to be concerned about that, whether or not how you would get an agreement with whoever and how the process would work, I think would be difficult. But the first thing to do would be to make sure you write that down and have that as in your list of things to vet and to look at. When dealing with a larger parent company, where'd that question go? That has multiple products, Google or Renaissance, do we need agreements for each program or parent company? Ultimately, if that service is listed within the um, Exhibit A, you can list all those services within that. For presentation purposes, you may want to copy that agreement for each of the each of the applications that you're using, just for presentation on your resource listing, to have those different resources listed. So if somebody was concerned about Freckle, they would be looking up Freckle rather than Renaissance Learning. But there's probably other ways of listing that, whether it's in your purpose or different ways of doing that in the database. But ultimately, one way to do it would be to copy that that listing in your agreements, copy it, and then change the resource to Freckle, and the other resource to Star Math, and the other resource to, so you could have that listing on your website that way. But ultimately, you can have one agreement that would cover all of those if the vendor lists that in their Exhibit A. If we're piloting an online program, for example, 3 months for free, do we need to officially sign off on an NDPA or a DPA? Sorry. It depends. It really depends on what your legal counsel would advise, but ultimately, if you're putting student information out there, what happens at the end of that 3 months? Are they going to delete that data? Are they going to keep it? How are they using it? So just be aware that, and the term risk was used quite a few times in the last webinar with Robin Swartz. Like, what is your risk that you're willing to take with that information, and putting it out there, and just have those conversations as a district, with your superintendents, with your curriculum people, with your tech people, with your legal team as well, to understand what all is involved with that. So it's something to definitely consider doing, even if you're doing a pilot. How about PI information that is provided for assessment? So that is something that is laid out in the in the SOPPA legislation, that information that you're providing to the state board is not necessarily, you don't need a DPA with the state board. I think one of the main things that I would just, as a district, is make a list of all those things and have that list available for one, vetting by your attorney, vetting by your superintendent, just so that you know all those possible places that your student information is. And that's something we can do collectively, and have that listed. But I think it's something that the state board will eventually come back and say, like, that they have an agreement with Pearson, or they have an agreement with Kite, or they have an agreement with DRC, and that kind of thing. But I think it's also important for you as a district to really make sure that you understand as a district, that your superintendent knows that this information's out there. We really don't have a lot of capabilities of, we send it to the state, and then the state sends it on. So just be aware that that's happening, and we'll continue to update you as we get more information. But that question is a recurring question, and definitely something that we are having conversations around. Clarification: if the existing DPA isn't the new version, do we need to wait for the new version to be available, or can we sign the current one? So you can, the new version of the Illinois NDPA is available on the resources webpage. It's available for you to download right now. If there is an existing originating agreement that was version 1.0, you should still be able to subscribe to that agreement at this point. Moving forward, it may become a situation where the originating district wants to go ahead and get a new agreement with the new 1.0A, and so they would do that, and then we would subscribe to that one. But ultimately, right now, if there's an originating agreement, you can sign on to that one. If there is no originating agreement, it would be helpful to all parties if we use the 1.0A to get that new originating agreement. I know it's a burden to put on the districts that are starting that process, and I've already invested time into going through that. And so just communicate with me, share with me things that are happening with that. But hopefully that answered your question with that. If you are self-hosting a vendor's product, do you still need to get an agreement? I would say, again, it depends, and I feel like I should get a job with PTAC and start. Yes, definitely use that listing, but also go to the ISPA website, and it's linked there. I just don't want everybody to depend on this being the link, because it could change. And if you're always going to the ISPA website to get the latest agreement, then you'll know that you're getting the latest agreement. So what was I saying? Oh, self-hosting. If you're self-hosting a vendor, it just really depends on what it is. Like if you're using Renaissance Learning, that's probably not self-hosted anymore. But if you're using your student management system in-house, or really any vendor, I guess I would approach it as I would try to get that agreement and negotiate with them and understand what access they have to my self-hosted environment. Do they have a backdoor into the system? Do they not have a backdoor? So I just maybe asking questions like that will help determine whether or not you need an agreement. But again, all those things are going to come down to what your legal team says that you need to have an agreement for and what you don't. But if we're sharing out those things, so like if, let's say that it's your student management system and we somehow create some kind of database that would show that this application, if it's self-hosted, these number of districts aren't getting these number of districts are not required to get an agreement, and these are, and so ultimately I think it's going to be important that you have an agreement, but at the same time it's going to be kind of up to each district to determine that. Going back and answering the with no exhibit and with exhibit is with the exhibit E. Ultimately, that's the one that we all want to use is with the exhibit. The without the exhibit E ultimately means that you don't want anybody piggybacking on your agreement. So with exhibit E is the one that we want to utilize. All right. What I'll do, so there's lots of things to discuss about the exhibit G, and I maybe what I'll do is try to, I can post what I'll do to make this process work better is to post both the exhibit G's, the exhibit G with the red lines that basically were the changes for the new one, so that you can see what that is, and that may all be that may also be something that you can share with your legal team so that they can look at the new version and understand what was changed as well. But there's stuff added to that to clarify things, to make things that people had issues with before, as far as limitations on disclosure for third parties, changing some numbers around from the number of days that were issued, the reimbursement process in section 10 is an area where some changes were made to make sure that it was that there was issues with the provider versus the breach based on the school district. There's at the end of the document, sections 14 through 20 were all added to the original exhibit E. I will schedule a separate discussion for those particular people that want to go into what may have changed and what is important. But ultimately, I will make that available to you, the redlined exhibit G, so that you can see and pass that along to your legal people that may have already vetted the original exhibit G for use in your district. So I'm gonna move on. Obviously, if there's other questions, concerns, if I didn't answer your question thoroughly enough, please reach out to me, schedule time on my calendar, and we can have a conversation around those things. And it's good for me to have those conversations so that I can better help answer your questions as well. So I'm going to go in here and access the database. So if you haven't already requested an account, if you go to the ISBE website, so those of you that are brand new and haven't requested an account to the database to gain access, do that portion of it first. And if you're having trouble with the drop down list, please let me know. I've had a couple of people recently tell me that it's not working. So it is a really super long drop down. So if your name's not in there or it's not working for you, definitely reach out to me. And then as far as using the system, I want to really focus on the Exhibit E. Obviously, if you're just getting started and you're not to this step yet, um, I'm working on trying to figure out ways of doing some onboarding type of things. So those people that are just getting started, here's step one, and we'll have a workshop, and then step two, we'll have another workshop, and to bring you on board. This is really meant to be just kind of a little bit of PD mixed in with the update. So you should now see an auto Exhibit E creator. And when you click on that, there's a couple different functionalities here that I think are things that would need to be pointed out. One is you now have an Excel link here that will allow you to download this listing in its entirety, so you can see all those agreements that are there for all these different applications. And then what the idea of this is that you would see anything that was in here as an originating agreement, and then the idea is that when you would review the exhibit or the originating agreement and see what was in there and make sure that what you're signing on to is what you want to sign on to. So if you scroll down here and you look at Exhibit A and Exhibit B and understand what it is that you're signing on to. So here's Exhibit A. They're saying what the product is. Here's Exhibit B. This is the data they're using. So once you've determined that this is the exhibit that you want to subscribe to, then you would come back up here and then click on Create Exhibit E. And then it's going to take actually your account information. And so all this stuff is not necessary to input as you're going through this process. You can always change this information later, but this would be information that you could use later for tracking of things. So if you know that you use this K12 in your district, you could put that in there. You know, you only use it for English language arts, you could put that in there. You could put additional information in there for the vendor as well. And then when I create this Exhibit E, it should create that document for me. So now if I go look at my manage agreements, I have to remember what agreement that was, reading IQ. So if I look at this, this should be the Orland originating agreement. And then if I look at the Exhibit E, it should be my signed version with my name on it and my information on it. So that all comes from your account information. So if you try this once or twice to utilize this, that's ultimately all you have to do to be subscribing to that. Obviously, we need to make sure as a alliance that we're putting the information in there. So when the originating district puts the originating agreement in there, that they upload they put the email address in there that the agreement's going to go to when people subscribe. So that and ultimately that should kick off an email to the operator from you. And so vendors may get information from me at some point, yeah, as I'm testing this process. But ultimately that should send an email with that Exhibit E document attached to the vendor. So that's the process that's going to happen. The other thing that's in here for you to look at, and this is going to take making sure that when we upload the stuff as an originating agreement, that we upload it properly. And so we're going to try to help with workflows and those types of things. The other functionality is that you can have somebody that manages this database that isn't necessarily the person that's going to sign the agreements. So if you want the superintendent to sign the agreements, or the assistant superintendent, or the director of curriculum, or somebody that you want to designate to be the signer of exhibits, you can use this prepare exhibit E. Again, you can go through this process and you would fill that in just like you would. Save prepared exhibit E. It does, at this point, it does not send that document, but the person that is set up to send exhibit E's could then sign the exhibit E and send that document. So if you look at account management and manage district users, you can manage roles of your individuals within that area, and they can be an exhibit E signer. So that could be the only role that you give that person, and they would be able to, when they sign into this, they would go to your district assignments, view prepared assignments, or view view prepared exhibit E's. So somebody else has prepared all of these exhibit E's, and then they would just come in and sign, and then they would be done with that process. And it would send the emails and send everything based on that person's account information that was set up in their account. I think that makes sense. All right, so that is a quick run through to those questions, or to the exhibit E things. Just want to make sure that we're understanding everything before we make a video that maybe leads people down the wrong path. But so again, just kind of a word of caution: use this critically and provide feedback if you're seeing things that aren't doing things that you feel like are doing things the way you expect them to do. Like if you're using this and you're not seeing things work the way you think they should work, please reach out to me and share that feedback with me. Because again, this is all kind of a new thing that's happening and new functionality for us. Even though states like Utah and Wisconsin have been using this, this is new functionality for us. So even the people that have been using it for a few months now may have questions. Blank exhibit Fs. Exhibit F is the vendor's security best practices. And I would recommend that you have that conversation with them. If for some reason they're not marking them because they're not doing any of them, that's one conversation. If they inadvertently did not mark them, then definitely have them pick one or two or all of them or whatever. But that's something that I think is part of the law that that vendors are using reasonable security practices as well, and that's what that exhibit F's there for. Again, I don't think it's anything that's probably super critical, but it's definitely something that if you see exhibit F's that are blank, specifically reach out to me with which ones they are, and that's something we can help follow up with. And follow up on with school districts that may be entered in the agreement, or check with the vendor themselves and stuff like that. So definitely share those types of things as you're seeing things that, as you go to an originating agreement and you don't see an email address, or you don't see certain things that you think should be there, definitely reach out to us, because as the Alliance, we can help. We're here to help you guys manage all this and try to make it consistent and duplicatable and piggybackable and